2 Samuel chapter 11. You know, when you consider David and the sin that he committed with Bathsheba, you know, it'll always strike me as, why did he do what he did? I mean, how could he possibly have done what he did and then went further and committed the atrocities that he committed to cover up his sin? And there was no doubt in my mind that he understood that his greatness came from God, and that everything that he had, everything he possessed, and the position in life that he owned was by God's hand. And there was no doubt in my mind that he was dedicated to serving God to the best of his ability. So why did he do what he did? You know, I guess that's going to be the age-old question, and we may never understand what went through his mind. So before we get started, there's a couple things I want to point out. I think there's a correction that needs to be made in the book. Has anybody been reading that book? Has it been helpful to you? Okay. If it hasn't, let me know, because I'm always trying to find things that works for the class. But if you look on page 81, the last paragraph, he says that David was not personally involved in the war against Ammon and the subsequent war against Syria. I think the statement, the subsequent war against Syria, is a mistake, and that he really meant to say the war against Rabbah, because David was personally involved with the war with Syria. I think he just might have got mixed up there. And I would probably think that instead of saying the war against Syria, say the war against Rabbah, because they were now laying siege against the capital city. So the previous war and the war that, the subsequent war is against the capital city, since it was not attacked the first time around. So if you want to make that little correction in your book, I think it might be worthwhile to know that. Now, the people in the context that we're going to be looking at, of course, there's David. We're going to see Joab and Bathsheba, and then there's a mention of Eliam, which is Bathsheba's father, and then Uriah the Hittite, and then there's a mention of Abimelech, who was the son of Jerubbesheth, and this is a story that happened over in Judges that Joab makes mention of. And one of the things that came to my mind was this. And I don't know how it really plays into the thing, but when I sat down and got my notes together, my mind was going down one train of thought, and then this afternoon, just like I said, the rabbit trail hit again, and I went down another path, and I said, this may have some merit to it. So I kind of threw something together real quick to review. You know, when Satan tempts us, he doesn't come flying at us like a fire truck with the sirens going and the red lights flashing, saying, "Here I am, I'm ready to tempt you." Satan doesn't take that approach. He looks at the vulnerabilities of man and his weaknesses, and he makes that approach to it. And I don't know, I can't remember the movie, but I'm not too, I don't watch too many of these religious movies, but there was one time I watched one, and it was about the time that Christ was being tempted by Satan. And the approach that the producers made, I said, this is really interesting. Christ was out in the wilderness. Of course, he'd been out there 40 days, and it was late at night. He had a fire going, and this man walks up to him and said, I said, it's cold out, and I saw your fire. Do you mind if I sit down and warm myself by your fire? Jesus said, help yourself. And so they get, involved in a little bit of chit chat. And in the course of the discussion, he said, "Aren't you Jesus, the one they say is the Son of God?" And he said, "I'm Jesus." And he said, "I haven't had anything to eat in 3 days. I'm hungry. Do you have anything to eat?" And he says, "No, I don't." And he said, "Well, you're the Son of God. Can't you turn these stones into bread?" You see, he kind of subtly worked into it and trying to catch him unaware. And so when I looked at the situation with David, what was happening in David's life that Satan was able to take advantage of a vulnerability that caused him to do what he did? I don't think David just arbitrarily said, you know, I'm the king of Israel, I can have anything and everything that I want, therefore I want her, so I'm gonna take her. I don't think he took that approach. So, one of the things I thought about was how old was David at this particular time these events took place? Well, we know in 1 Kings chapter 14:21 that Rehoboam, which was Solomon's son, was 41 years old when he became a king. And Solomon reigned for 40 years. So Solomon reigned 40 years. His son was 41 years old when he took the throne. So that means that he was born a year before Solomon took the throne. Now, he had to be old enough to father a son. And we're told that Rehoboam's mother was Naamah, which we don't have any information on her other than he was married to her before the Egyptian princess that we have mentioned in beginnings of 1 Kings. So he had to have been born during the reign of David, but a year before Solomon took the throne. So, if Solomon fathered a child between ages, let's say 16 and 20, let's say Solomon was 16 to 20 years old, and if David was 70 when he died, then these events happened when David was about 50 to 54 years old, roughly. And the math is that 70-year reigns minus 20 years of Solomon's life would mean David was about 50. And if you were to bump that up to say 25, then David would have been about 45 years old. So David was king over Judah when his firstborn was born. He was about 20, 25 years of age. Now, we do know that David was married for about 20 to 25 years before these events. So his 8 wives, 10 concubines has been in his household for 20 to 25 years, roughly. Now, I kind of got the slides out of Kahilta there. So what does this tell me about this particular event? He's been married 25 years, he's got 18 wives and concubines, and he's probably 45, 50 years old. So kind of imagine what's going on in his life. Okay, I go over here and I visit this one wife. I walk in the front door. What do I hear? Well, it's about time you've shown up. I haven't seen you in a month. Where have you been? You know, I've got this that needs to be fixed. I need this. Okay. So he goes over to this other wife. Where have you been? You know, I've expected you to be here. Do you like her better than you like me? What about, you know, can you see what he may be facing when he goes to visit his wives and his concubines? And then, if that wasn't enough, he sits down at his dinner table at night, mulling over what he's going to do about his household, and he looks up, and who does he see? Mephibosheth. You know, that's a lot of comfort in my life. So, I guess what I'm saying is that David may have been facing what you might call a midlife crisis. He's probably getting a lot of flack from his wives, and they probably don't show him the affection and the attention that he was probably looking for at this particular point in his life. You know, I've got this kingdom I've got to deal with, I've now got my wives to deal with, and they're giving me, you know, they're not showing me the love that I would like to see from a wife. So we're told in this particular account that happened one evening when that David rose from his bed, and evidently he was alone. He walks around his rooftop. He's probably contemplating his life. He said, I've got everything in the world. I've got a kingdom. I've got riches. I've got the nations bowing down around about me. But what I don't really have is that one person to show me the affection that I so want in this life. I've got wives, I've got concubines, but I don't have the affection that I'm looking for. So he looks off his rooftop down into possibly a garden area or maybe through an open window, and he sees this woman. And then Satan slips in. Here's the affection that you're looking for. You see, he could be looking at a vulnerability in David's life at this particular time that caused David to take the step that he took. And that, I think, is an important factor to focus on. Because in our lives, we have vulnerabilities. We have, periods of time in our life when we're at our weakest, and Satan knows how to exploit that weakness to cause us to sin. So keep that in mind as we go through the study, that this is possibly why David did what he did. It wasn't because he thought he was as great as Nebuchadnezzar and all of his wealth was because it belongs to me and it's mine, and I'm the one that did it. But I think he was looking for something that was missing in his life, and that may have been the cause of it. So be that as it may, let's look at some introductory thoughts. Now concerning, I'm going all the wrong way in this thing. Okay. Considering what we see in this particular chapter, we see three aspects of David's sin. First of all, covetousness. We know from the law of Moses in Exodus chapter 20 and verse 17, God specifically said, "You shall not covet your neighbor's wife." There's no specific punishment outlined in the law of Moses for it, only that when covetousness leads to possession of that person's belongings, then it becomes theft, and then we have to deal with thievery. And adultery. We know from the Ten Commandments again, Exodus 20, "Thou shalt not commit adultery." But the punishment of it is, he says in Leviticus 20 and verse 10, "He that commits adultery with his neighbor's wife, and the adulterer and adulteresses shall surely be put to death." I think David understood this. And then murder. "You shall not murder," Exodus 20 and verse 13. Then in Exodus 21 and verse 14, it says, "But if a man acts with premeditation against his neighbor to kill him with treachery, you shall take him from the altar that he may die." So David was faced with what he just did when he faced some serious judgments against him. He was facing murder on 2 accounts of violation of the law of Moses. And the third violation, even though it was not murder, was indeed probably the root cause of why he committed the other 2. So keep that in mind. David was not totally ignorant of what was going to be the outcome of his sin. But what he was doing, what was missing in his life that caused him to do this outweighed the possible punishment that he was probably going to face if he was caught. So, with that said, chapter synopsis. We see that Joab makes war with the Ammonites and he besieges Rabbah, the capital. David commits adultery with Bathsheba and she conceives. David attempts to cover up the pregnancy by having Uriah brought home from the war. David has Uriah killed in the battle at Rabbah. And David sends word to Joab not to be displeased with his death in battle. That's just the nature of war. And then David takes Bathsheba to wife, and she bears him a son, and the Lord is displeased with these actions. I don't think that David thought that what he was doing was not being observed, because as we go through all this, we're going to see some observations that people are beginning to see about what's happening. But as it stands to begin with, it says in the spring when they went out to battle, Joab was sent to the Ammonites. They destroyed the people and they besieged the capital. And that's where the biggest part of the battle was trying to take the stronghold. And it happened one evening that David arose from his bed and walked on the roof of the king's house, which he had every right to do. And from the roof he saw a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful to behold. Now, where she was at, she may not have been aware of being observable. She may have been inside, the window might have been open. Or she may have actually been out in the courtyard and really didn't care. We don't know her attitude about this particular situation, but we do know that where she was at, she was observed, and David, instead of looking away like we should, he looked at her, and I think maybe all these emotions that were building up within him, thinking, here's an opportunity to get what I'm missing in my life, whatever it may be. I tend to think he may have a lack of affection that he was probably starved for. But be that as it may, that's just an assumption. So David inquires about her, and she said, She's the daughter of Uriah, the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Then David sent messengers and took her. Now, when we see that phrase, took her, we're not thinking by force. Now, when we get over a couple of chapters, we're talking about another situation with, I forget who that guy was, Absalom, Tamar, and anyway, and her subduction. She was forced. They say she was took, she was forced. But in this particular case, the taking was done by simply being led away. Someone showed up her door and said, the king would like to see you. And probably the first thing that went off in her mind was, why does the king want to see me? You know, that, to be summoned by the king is probably not a good thing in most cases. But she's summoned, and this is David, they took her, and she came to him, and he lay with her, for she was cleansed from her impurity. Now, the text puts that in there for a specific reason. She had been cleansed from her impurity, which tells us that the event that is about to happen, that there is no way in the world that the child that was conceived could be rightfully her husband's. Because he was off at war, she was home. Now that she's conceived, there's the problem. And David does not know how to deal with this. And then when he finds out about it, he starts down another road. But the point taking is that when she conceives, she tells David that we've got a problem, David. Now, David could have simply said, no, that's your problem. But he also knows that he had sent messengers, had her brought to him, and there were people aware that she was in the castle at his request. So he understands now that we've got an issue that we've got to deal with. So after she told David she was with child, first thing he thought of is that we need to get the husband back home to his wife, and then we can use this as an excuse to cover up what happened between her and myself. So he sent to Joab saying, send me Uriah the Hittite. Now, if I was Joab, first thing that went to my mind was, why is a king asking for one of my foot soldiers? What's going on here? You know, if he wants to find out about the war, he needs to call me or wait for me sending a messenger to him. Why is he specifically calling for this one guy? Okay, I mean, that's common sense. You know, if you were the owner of a company or worked for somebody who was an owner of a company and he calls down for a specific person, we're all thinking, what's going on with this guy and the boss? And that's what we see here. I think Joab was not, just overlooking this, but he was seeing what was happening. So he brings, Uriah comes in, so he starts having a little chit chat with him and says, how's the war going? How are the people doing? Tell me about the situation down there. And then after they had their little chat, David says, go into your house, wash your feet, get comfortable, just take your ease for a little while, and the pleasure of your wife, and just enjoy yourself. Now Uriah was a man of integrity. He would not do that. In fact, he said when he departed the king's house, the king sent him a gift of food to follow him to his house. But instead, Uriah slept at the king's house with all of his servants of his lord and did not go down to his house. So the next morning when it was told David that Uriah didn't go down to his house, so David called him back. He said, did you not come from a journey? Why didn't you go down to your house? You've had a long trip. You should go home and relax and enjoy life for a little bit. And not only that, but he says that what can you say? He tells Joab. He tells him and says, "My lord, Joab and the servants of my lord are encamped in the open fields. Shall I go to my house and eat, drink, and lie with my wife? As you live, as my soul live, I will not do it." How can I do this, enjoy the comforts of life, when the children of Israel are out there in the field fighting a war, for our cause? He said, I just can't do that because my mind is with them. He said, I would not, to me, it would be a dishonorable thing. Then said David said to Uriah, wait here today, and also, and tomorrow, I will let you depart. So he remained in Jerusalem the day and the next. And then David called him back in. He ate, drank before him, and he made him drunk. So not only is he trying to get Uriah to go to his house willingly, now he's thinking, if I can get Uriah drunk, like a drunken sailor, then he'll just wander off to his house, and that'll be the end of the story. But even when the guy was drunk, he had the integrity about himself to go and sleep with the servants by the king's door. He would not go down to his house. So David was thinking, now, this is not even going to happen. I can't even get one of my most trusted servants, one that has as much honor, loyal, and integrity about himself, to do this. What am I going to do? So he said, well, here's the last recourse. Happened the next day that David wrote a letter to Joab, sent it by the hand of Uriah. And he wrote in the letter, set him in the forefront of the hottest battle and retreat from him that he may be struck down and die. The man hand delivered his own death warrant. And that is pitiful in itself. But now Joab sees this, and he's thinking, David just called this man back. He's been gone for a few days. Now I get this letter from the king. He wants me to have Uriah killed in battle. Pretty much just saying he's going to be murdered by the hands of the enemies. We're going to put him out there, and then we're just going to pull away from him, and he's going to be by himself. What else can you say? You're killing the man. Then after it happened, Uriah the Hittite died. They put him out in battle. They pulled back away from him, and he died. So Joab sent the king his servant with a message, telling him about the status of the war. And he also said that if David becomes angry at you and starts screaming and hollering about how incompetent I am as a general, because I was competent enough to push all my people up against the wall, knowing that historically that such an event caused a guy to die from a woman that pushed a millstone over the edge. He said that you just don't do that. You just don't run right up there in the heat of the battle. He said, but if David gets angry and starts hollering at you about how incompetent your general is, you tell him your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead also. That was specifically what David wanted to hear. Because now, with Uriah the Hittite out of the picture, David sees an opening to marry Bathsheba, and now can legally have the child without any excuse. So he thought. Then David sent his messenger saying to Joab, do not let this thing displease you, for the sword devours one as well as another. In other words, don't be upset. That's just the nature of war. He didn't want Joab to either be upset for losing a good man, or being upset with the fact that he is now an accomplice with David in the murder of a man in the course of a battle. I just don't know what Joab was thinking. But I will say this as we get into the next chapter. Joab starts what we normally call damage control. And we will see this happening 2 or 3 times through the remainder of this chapter as Joab tries to protect David and try to keep David on the throne without any problems. And that's kind of self-serving. If David were to be dethroned, if David were to be killed, Joab, being the commander of the army, would now have to work under another king. And that may or may not happen. That new king may say, I don't like the way you do business, I'm going to bring in my own people. So Joab may find himself in a very, terrible situation. To his best interest to keep David on the throne, because now I know David trusted me to do a terrible thing, and I did it for him. David is going to keep me in place because he can trust me to do his dirty work, so to speak. So now Joab is seeing a side of David that probably he didn't expect, but now he sees it, and now he's trying to fix it, and we'll see that as we go through it. So Joab, don't be angry. You know, that happens in war, people die. But instead he says, strengthen your attack against the city and overthrow it, so encourage it. Now, when the wife of Uriah heard that her husband had died, she mourned for her husband, and usually this is a mourning period of about 30 days. And David sent and brought her to his house, and she became his wife, and she bore him a son. Now, considering the timing of all of these events, from the time of conception to the time of mourning, or time of finding out that she's pregnant, to the time of mourning, or the time of killing Uriah and the time of mourning, David takes her as his wife, and the child is born probably several months early, and everybody's wondering, you know, we got a full-grown kid here, and he was, what, 6 months? Maybe 7? So that should be another ding in people's minds of what's going on between David and Bathsheba. But you think that now, this period of time, 6 or 7 months has passed, and nobody has said anything to them about what had happened, about the punishments, or questioning them about these events. So David is probably settling back in his throne thinking, I've gotten the situation under control, and surely God has not struck me down because of it, so therefore what I did must not have displeased him. But yet, what David had done displeased the Lord. Because after the child was born, the judgment of God comes. And that's what we will see in chapter 9. So what are some of the lessons learned that we can gather from all this? I probably had these up there and didn't even know it. Okay. Some of the first lessons that we learn is that as Christians, do not become the tempter by the way that we dress or by the lack of clothing. And being the cause of someone else's sins does not exclude you from your actions. If Bathsheba was out there actually doing this intentionally, trying to get the king's attention, then she becomes the tempter. And as Christians, we should not try in any way, shape, or form to tempt a person of the opposite sex by the way we dress or by the way we conduct ourselves in life. Guard yourself against temptations. Like David, you should have turned your head and walked away from the temptation. And then, considering the actions of Joab, do not willingly become engaged in sin with others. Well, this is might have been better phrased, but he became an accomplice, so to speak, in covering up David's sin. Maybe he didn't realize it at first, but I think when it was all said and done, he understood. And then don't think that your position in life places you above temptation and sin or its consequences. David was king. He was ruler of all. And even if he thought that was the fact, that, you know, I'm untouchable, I'm the king, my position allows me to do what I want and take what I want. Don't think that your position in life places you above any temptations and sins or its consequences. It'll affect the king of a nation as much as it will the pauper in the street. And do not try to hide your sin by involving others in your attempt, like David did with Joab. Best way out of this situation is to own up to your mistakes and accept the consequences. And then, as we see in the case of David, the temptation of lust led to adultery. Well, went to covetousness, led to adultery, and then led to murder. And what we see in this is that one sin can very easily lead to another, especially if we're trying to cover something up so that the world doesn't see it. The world may never see your sin, but I can guarantee you that more than likely it will come to light. And do not think that others do not see what you're doing, even if they do not talk about it. People see what's going on, just like the messengers that went and brought Bathsheba to the king, and then several hours later took her back to her house. We understand this was in the middle of the night. We understand what, you know, it doesn't take a lot of wisdom to understand what's going on. And do not help another in wrongdoing to cover up other sins, just like Joab did. But I think the bottom line in all this is the life of Uriah. like Uriah, you need to maintain your integrity, your dignity, and your faithfulness as a servant to the very end. And Uriah demonstrated that from the very beginning to the very end. And he did not have a clue about what was going on with his wife and David, and that's what was sad. And he was devoted to David to his very end of his life, maintaining his servitude to him. And I think that's a lesson that we should all understand about our servitude towards Christ. So, I probably didn't cover what you were hoping I would cover, but you know, it's a story that a lot of people have heard over the years, and we just don't, you know, how many times can you say something different about something that's already been worked over? But I think it's interesting that if we take it from an approach that David had something missing in his life that needed fulfilling, and this was a temptation that Satan was able to exploit, we can see how the law of God could have been pushed off to the side, thinking that my life can be better taking this path. And that's something all of us at one time or another will probably face, that what we can find in this path in life is a lot better than what God can offer me through his word. Got a few minutes. Any questions or comments? Charlie?
It just, as another parallel to this, we try to teach our kids and ourselves to be honest and truthful, and this is a perfect example of one lie. What is that? How many lies does it take to cover that one lie up?
That happens. That's true. You know, sometimes kids don't understand that, but you know, some like I say, some lessons in life have to be hard taught. And like David, this is one. And this particular, and what's interesting is that David's life up to this time was one success after the other in every aspect of his life. And when this sin happened and God condemned him, the rest of this chapter, you're going to see that David has one problem after the other, and the problem is not necessarily outside nations, but the problems is within his family itself. His family causes him a tremendous degree of problems, heartaches, and I think that his dwelling upon his love for his family and what they were doing to him was just probably more than he could bear. And we're going to see David's, I guess, personal downfall, maybe not the downfall of the kingdom, but David's personal downfall because of his sin. Now, at the end of David's life, I think there was no doubt in his mind that God was there and he was going to have to answer for what was happening in his life. But he also understood that greatness can be had with God and failure can be had when you do something contrary to what God says. Anything else? Nothing? Okay. Well, we're going to go to chapter 12 Sunday morning, and this will be, of course, David, God's bringing to light what David has done and the punishment that David faces. And then we'll see, as I said, Joab trying to do a little bit of damage control. And it's an interesting chapter in itself because we saw what the punishment was for adultery and for intentional murder. Now we see how God treats this particular situation in light of the judgments of the law of Moses. If you haven't read your book, you might want to read it, especially these two chapters, because they're very enlightening in a lot of aspects. So anyway, appreciate y'all's attention.